overlap between the two products. So you might consider the features of the different products to see which one would make more sense for your students in that overlap scenario. So thinking about the whys behind personalized learning, we want to be able to make sure that all of our students have any of the previous background knowledge or content that they might have forgotten to help make themselves successful within their current grade level. Past that, we want to make sure that they're able to remember everything that they are learning this year as we all work very hard to teach those things to them. So both of these programs are going to allow students to review content that they've previously learned. The third component that these programs assist with is motivating our students. They experience success in the platforms as they better understand math and are more engaged with the math process as a result. Now, in addition to motivating students by allowing them to work on content that they're ready to learn, these personalized learning products both provide you as teachers data. That data is going to allow you to see what students know already, what they might be able to work on next, and how you might be able to support them. While you're getting that data, you're not having to make assignments or put a lot of work into the beginnings of the program, right? Both of these programs are working in the background to determine what students are ready for without us having to make that decision for them. And of course, students are going to be interacting in the program, being able to use manipulatives, being able to watch videos, a variety of items to make sure that they get the support that they need while they are learning. Now, again, no work for us to set up to be able to get students started, but a couple behaviors that we suggest teachers practice with students while they're using these programs are, number one, student conferences. So the ability to meet one-on-one with students and review their progress within the program in order to support them making additional progress, right? Maybe there are some behaviors that they are making in the program that isn't quite what we would want them to do. And then also the ability to very easily provide students small group instruction. We can take the data and reporting that we get from these programs to be able to support students right when they need it. It's almost like a computer assistant for our hard work that we already do with students each day. All right, so we're going to start now by looking specifically at the Redbird product, which is the elementary younger grade version of this personalized learning program. Anything in particular you're excited about seeing or learning about, go ahead and throw it in chat as I switch over for us to start looking at Redbird. All right, in case you've had any time to look at Redbird online before, that Redbird is actually named Birdie, and students will experience Birdie on their screens as they're working in the platform. That's just a little bit of cuteness and support for them. Now, the specifics of Redbird Mathematics. It is completely web-based, so you don't need to worry about having anything special on your devices for it to work for students. It is adaptive to students' work and covers the grade bands K through 7. Again, you'll see some overlap between those grade bands and the grade bands that'll come up for ALEKS. The goal of Redbird to ensure that every student is algebra ready by the time they complete the content. And it was developed at Stanford University after many years of research on how students could best learn content. Now, the algorithm behind Redbird is something called adaptive motion. Adaptive motion is what is allowing that personalizing of the content that students are seeing in the platform. Starts out with a course placement activity. Now, the goal of this course placement activity to make sure that students are working in the appropriate content. It'll be very short, just a few questions. It ends after students get 2 questions wrong in a row and places them in one of 16 entry points between grades kindergarten through 7. And you do have the option as an instructor to adjust that placement if you decide it's not appropriate for that student. Now, at this point, students are going to work through an instructional phase for them to understand the current content that they're seeing. And after that instructional phase, you'll see those circles there on my screen. Those are practice opportunities. So first instruction and then practice. The amount of practice that students get will depend on how successful they're being with the questions that they're attempting. The more successful they're being, the fewer questions they'll see. If they're struggling, they'll have more opportunity, and they'll even be provided another instructional opportunity. Again, Redbird's goal is to get students as competent in this content as possible. If students continue to struggle through practice after that second bit of instruction, students will move to a precursor lesson. The goal of that precursor lesson would be to catch students up on any of the prerequisite content that they might need to be successful with the current content. So students will always be brought back to the current pathway that they're on. So quite a few different opportunities to provide students support. Now, Sally, I see your comment in chat about engaging and motivating students, and I feel like you asked at just the right time. Because the very first phase that we talk about when we talk about the Redbird learning model is to engage the students. We want to make sure as students get started that they find ways that this math could apply to their lives, or at least to something that interests them. An example of one of those engagement activities that would start out a unit is students learning about fractions with creating music.
Engineers set up equipment to record music.
So here students will start by watching this student, this engineer, he's a sound engineer who's working on mixing music. And students will go on to learn that fractions are a component of what this professional has to do in order to be able to mix that music. So already any students who are interested in music or electronics are maybe interested in learning more from this particular unit because they've been hooked from that music recording example. Once students have an opportunity to get hooked like that, we move into that understand phase. Now, this isn't just students being presented information on a screen, but actually interacting with the content. You'll see here some of the examples of what it could look like for them. They might be watching videos or, kind of seeing demonstrations of the content, and they'll actually be engaging with a variety of tools to better understand the math that's being presented to them. As students are practicing in this instructional phase, they'll be able to see how far they are through the content using these little circles here on the screen. They'll be able to access tool support, and they'll be able to use manipulatives to help them understand what to do in the problem. And you'll notice here as they attempt to answer questions that they'll be provided immediate feedback and multiple opportunities to get that question correct. As students are working through that instruction and successfully complete all of those circles there at the top, they'll move on to the apply phase of the learning model. During this application phase, they'll be able to answer a wide variety of questions that are related to the content that they were just learning about. I have some examples of those as well for you here. The goal is to ensure through different models and different things that students might see that they really do understand this particular content that they've been presented with. And again, this is where if students continue to not do well, they will be able to get additional support. There you'll also see gaming opportunities that happen for students in the platform as well. Now, as students are working through those item sets, they'll be able to accelerate through them quickly. You can see here as an example of a student who's on fire. It's kind of fun to hear students get excited when they say they're on fire in class as they're working in the content. But up there at the top, it could also show an on-level motion or an instructional mode review if students are struggling with the content. Now, I mentioned that there are games available to students in the platform. They'll pop up at appropriate times in lessons. And there's also a separate games area within the program that you can decide whether it's on for students to utilize or whether it's off for students to not be able to access. So some games all the time at the appropriate spots of a lesson, and then an additional game suite that you all can decide to utilize or not. And of course, a wide variety of technology interactive items so that we're able to prepare students for using computers to do math, which we know they're certainly expected to do in a low stakes environment, right? Where they're given the opportunity to feedback on their content and rework it if necessary. Now, some students say the most exciting part of Redbird is this last part we're going to talk about. Students have the opportunity to work through a create phase once they complete these first 3 phases. Depending on the unit that they're in, that'll look a little different. Sometimes it'll just be a review of some content, but sometimes it'll be something called a STEM project. The STEM project will pull together a variety of different topics that they've worked on up until this point and provide them with a real-world scenario that they would have to use that content knowledge to address. So here you can see an example of a civil engineer who's in the process of evacuating a town in preparation for a hurricane. So students will receive a few different data points, as well as learning about the job of a civil engineer to actually make it through the process of evacuating this town. Students will have other opportunities like building exercise routines, launching rockets, launching satellites, all sorts of different things that really allow students to apply that math that they've learned. And I will show you all how to get access to trying Redbird online as well before we wrap today. I saw the question there in chat. So while students are doing all of this, while they're in the platform, what's happening for data? What sort of data opportunities do we have? Students in their account have what's called a student snapshot. Impactful because it shows every single thing the student has done and allows anyone who has the link to this particular snapshot the opportunity to really see what students have been successful with and what students need help with. As teachers, we're going to see this rolled up to us for the entire class, but sometimes a parent or someone else supporting the student might want to see if there's places that they can support them. So they could utilize this report to go through and review any of the content that students were working on. So if I'm curious to see, here's a bunch of red boxes, right? Red means they weren't successful. Green means they were. I could come in here and see exactly what the student did for each of the questions. I could even choose to turn what the student did off and rework the question live with the student. So really great opportunity to be able to interact with that student and their progress. Now, again, for us as instructors, all of the data is going to be rolled up, starting with something that you see here, which we call the news feed. The news feed is going to show what all students are doing actively in class. It'll pop up if students are doing really well. It'll pop up if students are struggling with content so that you can provide them appropriate support. Of course, Redbird is also tracking students' cumulative process. What is everything? that they have been doing since they started within the platform. We'll be able to see the time spent in the date range that you select. And an important metric for Redbird is how often students were correct on first attempt. We do want students to experience some amount of productive struggle, right, as they really form those new synapses in their brains for what they're learning in math. But if that correct on first attempt percentage is too low, we might recognize that the student would need some support in the content that they're working on. We'll be able to see how quickly students are moving through the lessons, be able to see the breakdown of students' time and their current location. So if I wanted to dive into some details for these students, just clicking on this current location will load that student snapshot report that we were just viewing. Now, of course, we can see this data in additional ways. Another way that we can see this data is all of the content across all the grade levels and which students have progressed through any of it. So here, the higher each one of these bars are at the top, the more students who've worked on that particular lesson. So I can see here in this particular class that my students have completed mostly grade 4 lessons, with some in grade 3 and some in grade 2. If I wanted to, I could click into a specific grade level. So here's an example of clicking into grade 3. And I can see where all of my students are sitting across each of the lessons in that grade level. This becomes impactful in a case like this, where you can see there's a bunch of red, right? There's a bunch of students who were ultimately not proficient with this lesson. Now, that doesn't happen quickly, right? Remember, students receive instruction and practice. If they're struggling, they receive additional instruction and additional practice. And then they also receive a precursor lesson from a previous grade level and get brought back. So in order for this to be read, it means that they really attempted everything that was available to them in Redbird. And it would be a great opportunity to provide them some specific support. So a quick sort would let you see who those students were so that you would be able to support them all at the same time in your work with them. And if you're asking how you could support them, you could pull up the student snapshot reports and actually go through some example questions that they struggled with, or you could use additional resource that comes from your math program as well. So again, Redbird would be what's available for our younger students. It would be the best choice for students, I would say, up until the 3rd grade level. And then kind of 3rd grade through 6th grade levels, we have some choices between the two programs. But then once students get to those middle school bands, ALEKS, which is the program that we're going to look at next, would provide the best support for those students. Now, folks were asking for the demo credentials. I am going to drop this website URL in the chat for you, and it is the website that I have loaded here on my screen. So I'll take just a couple minutes and show you what's available here so that you know what to experience when you have a chance to review yourself later. In this step 1 here, you'll be able to go through an interactive student demo. So it's going to be examples from 4th grade, but it'll show you step by step exactly what students would be seeing while they were working in the Redbird platform. After the tour, you can come here and view these grade-specific activities. So what this is snapshots of what would happen in each of these grade levels for you to go in and interact with. So for example, if you wanted to see what 2nd grade looks like, each one of these links would take you to one of those items within that particular grade level. As I continue my way down the page, you'll be able to see examples of those projects that I mentioned to you. So you'll see the lower grade levels do not have projects available. They'll just have culminating activities. But once students get to 2nd grade and above, each one of these red boxes here indicates a unit within the Redbird platform that students would have a STEM project available to them. And again, if you wanted to actually go in and try some of those STEM projects, you could do so here. You can see there's a grade 3, a grade 4, and a grade 6 project. I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to show you my favorite STEM project activity, which comes from this exercise science in grade 3, where we have the opportunity to build an avatar's actual exercise routine. So we'll get some instructions about which parameters this routine has to meet, and then have the option to actually set this routine up. My favorite is dance, so I'm going to make my avatar dance here for a few minutes. By the way, I'm going to get this completely wrong, and Redbird will give me that feedback, but just so you all have an idea of what this opportunity would look like for students. So once the student has gone back and checked that this routine is going to meet those goals, the student will be able to check it out. So once their exercise routine is complete, they will see how they did towards that particular routine and be able to complete the task again. So a fun way for students to apply some of the math that they've been learning in an environment that's still no work for us, right? Sometimes you hear project and you go, oh no, I've got to prepare a bunch of things for students to be working on. But with these Redbird projects, everything that students need is already prepared for you. The other thing that this website will detail for you are the different types of reports that are available for students to view. And we didn't look at this before, but keep in mind that all of the classroom data could be rolled up to an administrative level if you wanted to be able to see how classes are performing across all of the available classes in the school. I'm going to pause here for a moment and see if folks have any questions they want to check in on for Redbird. I'll give you a chance to throw those into chat, and then we'll move on to taking a look at ALEKS math as well. All right, we are going to continue on with ALEKS. If questions come up, do feel free to throw them in that Q&A section or in chat, and we will take a look at them towards the end of our time today. So now we're switching, right? Redbird was what was going to help our younger students, and now we're going to be looking at ALEKS as a way to help our older students. Now, ALEKS is also personalized learning built on an algorithm, right? ALEKS is an acronym. You can see those orange letters there in my title slide. It actually stands for Assessment and Learning in Knowledge Spaces. And everything that you hear your students referencing about ALEKS, they'll probably be talking about a pie. And you can see example of that pie chart that they will see in their account here on the screen. The components of ALEKS essentially are that students first take an assessment to figure out what content they should already have credit for within the platform. And then we take students on a path of personalized learning generated just for them. And then we continue to provide reassessment opportunities to make sure that students have remembered all the content that they've covered. Now, if we could see into each of our students' brains, we would see that the amount of knowledge that they have in reference to these pies of topics is very diverse, right? Some of our students are going to have a lot of knowledge, and we can think about that as their ALEKS pie already being pretty filled in. And others of our students are going to have very little knowledge, and we can think of that as their pie being pretty empty and in need of some support. In all of these scenarios, what ALEKS is going to be able to do is take students to their zone of learning, to the exact area where we would expect them to experience success. Now, those green circles that you see there on the left represent all the topics that students already have credit for. Those purple circles far over there to the right represent all of the topics that these students are not ready for yet, right? And in between those two areas is the zone of learning, the area where we would expect students to be successful. As a matter of fact, our data shows that students are successful greater than 92% of the time with the content that they're presented in that orange zone. And since we know that learning isn't linear, we know that students could be working on a variety of topics and a variety of subject areas in math at the same time within that zone of learning. But regardless of what students are working on, as the year goes on, pay close attention to what's going to happen to that orange circle. That orange circle is going to progress towards the right of this learning continuum, right? Topics that students hadn't learned yet, they will have learned, they'll turn green. And some of those topics that were too far out there in the purple area will become part of the student zone of learning. So ALEKS is automatically moving students along this continuum in order for them to continue having good, applicable content for them to work on. Now, let's take a little bit of a look at what the ALEKS learning model is going to do for students. First up, for students, ALEKS provides a tools tutorial. Now, ALEKS avoids multiple choice questions, so we want to make sure students are familiar with how to answer the questions. So students would spend about 5 minutes in this tools tutorial, understanding how to make graphs or type in numbers, any of the components that they would use in the platform. While they're doing that, they'll also be reminded, you can see my orange arrow there in the middle of the screen. They'll also be reminded that at any point they want help, they can use the question mark that will be available on their screen to get support with the content in ALEKS. Once students finish that tools tutorial, next up for them is this initial knowledge check. This initial knowledge check is going to help them to figure out everything that they already know in the course so that they can be placed in the most appropriate location. Last year, ALEKS also added an opportunity for you to give students a placement knowledge check. Now, this placement knowledge check is optional. The placement knowledge check would determine if students have enough prerequisite knowledge to be successful with this content. Okay. So maybe you want all of your students to kind of have access to the same set of content anyway, at which point it would be redundant to provide students with that placement knowledge check, but it is available if you'd like to use it. In terms of the actual initial knowledge check, it'll contain between 25 and 30 questions. Typically, we see it takes students between 30 and 60 minutes to complete. And students will always be able to log out, log back in, and pick up where they left off. Now, all the questions that are being generated in ALEKS are being generated by an algorithm. So students aren't going to see the same questions. And this assessment is adaptive. So students aren't even going to see the same type of assignment when they log in and complete that content. Now, in terms of what's up next for students, it would be their personalized learning pathway. Remember, students in our classes might all be learning some of the same information from us, but they have different areas that would make the most sense for them to work on learning personally next. This is what the student's login page will look like on subsequent logins. And they'll be able to see how much of their pie they already have credit for. That'll be the area that's colored in. And then the remaining gray area is the area that students still have to complete. As they work in product, they're going to make each one of these borders for each one of these sections grow to fill in that gray area. Now, in terms of what students might interact with in the platform, there's a wide variety of question types. You can see some examples here of students interacting with scatter plots or with box and whisker plots, plotting points, shading a solution to a system of inequalities. One of my personal favorites as a former geometry teacher is the ability for students to check their work on each step of a 2-column proof as they're working through the platform. So the real one-on-one support that students would need to understand the content. Now, while they're working on all these questions, they'll be provided immediate feedback and multiple opportunities to be able to answer those questions. And if they struggle, they'll have the opportunity to work on alternate content instead. And as instructors, we'll be provided the information that those students might need support. Students can access quite a bit of support for themselves within the platform. You'll see some buttons here on the right side. Students have the ability to use textbook references, personal tutor videos, dictionaries, messages to you as their instructor if they're having trouble, as well as printing opportunities if they wanted to be able to access any of that instruction in print. Now, the last component to mention about ALEKS, of course, is that reassessment opportunity. Just because students knew it a few months ago doesn't mean we should assume that students still remember it now, right? So that algorithm behind ALEKS is automatically going to reassess students periodically throughout the year. It'll be a pretty short assessment, usually about 10 to 12 questions, just to make sure that students should really keep the credit for anything that they have learned within the ALEKS platform. Now, ALEKS gives us a lot more ability to be an architect of the students' learning than Redbird does. Of course, it's completely personalized for us already from day one, but we have some other options. On the left, we could choose to edit the pie content, meaning we could choose to add or remove some content from what ALEKS has designed for us based on what we're covering with our students and what we want them to see. We also have the option to use modules in ALEKS, which would allow us to align the pathway in ALEKS to the scope and sequence of our curriculum. So if you want to keep it personalized, but also keep the content that students are working on a little bit closer to what you're also teaching them in class, you have the opportunity to set that up. So you don't have to do anything for students to work in platform, but you have some options available to you. Even further still, if you wanted to, you could choose to generate assignments in ALEKS, meaning you're picking specific questions for all of your students to work on together. Now, while students are doing all that, what is it going to look like for you? What type of information will you have available? There is a full suite of reports available at both the class level as well as the administrative level if we want to see multiple classes grouped together. We'll take a look at a couple of those reports now. I'll also show you how you can demo an ALEKS account that's filled in with fake data if you want to be able to go see experiences for students and teachers as well. One of the most used reports is the ALEKS Pie report. It will show how our whole class is trending towards filling in that necessary content. And we'll be able to drill down to each individual topic that makes up that particular set of lessons. When we get to each of those topics, we can see what % of our students have been successful with that, what % of our students still have that to work on, as well as perhaps most importantly, any students who have worked through ALEKS and are still struggling with that content. This will really allow us to provide differentiated support to our students. Here, for example, I've selected all the students who haven't yet gotten through solving a multi-step equation given in fractional form. Now, with these 5 students that ALEKS has identified for me, I could make a small group. And I could work with those students separately from the class. Maybe the rest of the class is working in ALEKS on something else or another assignment. And I could provide them the just-in-time support that we know they need based on the fact they haven't gotten through that particular topic yet. So without having to provide additional assessments to students, you can see where every student is across all of the hundreds of topics in that particular course. Now, ALEKS will also show us exactly what students have been completing with the time that they've had available to them. So here we can see by date how much time students are spending in platform, as well as how many topics students are being successful with out of how many that they've attempted. So sometimes we'll just take a quick view at the class level and make sure that students really all logged in on that particular day, or that most of the students met your expectations. If you find a student you're curious about, right, maybe this student right here, they spent 1 hour and 15 minutes logged into program. That's a really long time to be on the computer all at once, right? They attempted 6 topics, but they learned 0. So in that 1 hour and 15 minutes, they didn't really make a lot of progress. We'd be able to go in and see exactly what they were doing with that time. So we can see their progress by date. We can see their progress by topic if we click on a particular date. And we could, even if we wanted to, go into each of these circles to see what they actually did with the time that they're there. So you could find that students were not experiencing success, right, with the topics they were trying. You could go in, you could see what their responses were to the topics that they were trying, and as necessary, provide them additional support. You could do that one-on-one, or you could do that in those small groups that I referenced before. So really a great supporting tool to be able to help your students. Now, again, I mentioned data available on the administrative level as well. We'll take all that information and roll it up so that we can see across a building how students are progressing. There'll be some quick views, as you see here on my screen, of how progress has changed in that time range. There'll be some additional options to see if students are meeting their weekly learning targets and what the activity time looks like for students. Now, in all of these cases, you'll see there's a view full report option at the bottom of each tile. From there, you'll be able to see graphs and tables at the intervals that you'd like for the categories that you'd like. Right, so here we're comparing from month to month how the entire school filled in their pie. But we could also compare how different teachers' classes are making progress. So maybe this teacher is doing something very interesting in their class that's leading to a 5% growth in this month that some of the teachers with a lower growth percentage could benefit from learning about. Other reports at the student level include an individualized education report that would show all of the details for one individual student. So all these data points that we're gathering for them, if you need to present data and progress for one student, have been gathered for you in the account as well. So whatever data point would be helpful for you all to see is available within the ALEKS platform. All right, now I mentioned that I was going to take us in and show you how you could demo an ALEKS account. And I am going to go over and do that for us now. Now, for reference, ALEKS actually started as a secondary college level math program back in the early 90s and has since spread to address content all the way down to 3rd grade. But when you head to the ALEKS website, you'll see a wide variety of content available to students. Now, for specifically the free trial opportunity, there's a little free trial link here. And now I'm going to go ahead and take this URL and post it in chat for your reference. But this will allow you to register and actually have a live ALEKS account. It's a demo account, so you're not going to be able to see your personal progress, but it'll give you the opportunity to interact with what students and instructors will see in the platform as well. Now, I saw a question about usernames and passwords for Redbird. For both Redbird and ALEKS, students would utilize a specific username and password for them. Instructors would also have a username and password associated with their account that would allow them to see their progress. So both that Redbird link that I shared earlier and this ALEKS link that I've just shared now, you don't need any sort of username or password to just go in and demo the experience. But by the time you're using a real account, you would, in fact, then use a username and password for that. I want to provide you all an opportunity to ask all of your questions or let me know what else you'd like to see. Maybe you have some questions about Redbird versus ALEKS, whatever you'd like. Go ahead and type them up so we can address them in the time we have here today. While you think about and type those, I will mention that typically folks lean towards ALEKS over Redbird, where those middle grades overlap. The reason they lean towards ALEKS is because the data that's available to teachers is more robust, and the learning pathway that's available to students is a lot more dynamic within the ALEKS platform than the Redbird platform. And of course, it makes sense that we would have more advanced features as students got older and content got more involved. So that's not a surprise. But again, through third grade, we typically see folks use Redbird. Third and fourth is a pretty even split, but by the time students get to fifth grade, we are typically asking them and seeing them utilize ALEKS instead. Has anybody seen today something that they are excited about? What's the favorite feature that you've seen so far in the time that we spent together? As a teacher, I found my favorite feature to be able to see exactly what students had completed, right? We don't have to guess or think that maybe they completed it because we gave them the time, but actually being able to see every detail and then share it with others, teachers, parents, any sort of support to make sure that students are getting the most efficient use of their time.
Absolutely. And I think my favorite feature, since we're just talking about this, is I know what my students are struggling with. So I know exactly what topics, it's almost like what you said exactly, but like I know what topics they're struggling with. I know where they need help and how much they've covered within that topic as well. It's very detailed. It's a great time for questions, you guys. If you've got any questions at all, let us know in the chat box, the Q&A box, and we can address it. It looks like we don't have any questions as such. Question about the recording and the links of the training. Sure, we can send the recording. Links of the training, do you mean the demo links? You're very welcome. You can just click on it right now. I've dropped it in the chat box again. We'll only be emailing you the recording. If you want to have a demo link, you can take a note of it right now. You're very welcome. Thank you, Jean.
Yeah, sure, welcome. And also, you'll find that just searching the internet for these products will probably bring you to these exact pages. So if you don't get a chance to get the links, you can get that information quickly out there. But I'm excited for all of you to have another opportunity to really help students be successful in math. And I'm glad we could share Redbird and ALEKS with you this afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And it looks like, you've got some time on your hands and you can go back. Thanks again. And we'll see you next week for those of you who've registered for the AP webinar. Hannah says we're the luckiest. No, we're actually really lucky that you're with us and improving so many lives as well with children and making sure everything's working. So thank you so much. Take care and goodbye. Bye. Thank you.